Have you ever wondered why there are so many fireworks displays every November 5th, keeping you awake at night and terrorizing your dog? Well, you clicked on the right video. Stick around and I'm going to explain all of that to you. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel Walking History with me, Mick Priestley, author, historian and walking tour guide here in central London. We're here in the middle of the night at the Palace of Westminster, which is actually better known to pretty much everybody as the Houses of Parliament, after the House of Commons and the House of Lords, which are the two legislative chambers that occupy the building. This is the official meeting place of British government, but it's a building owned by the King, and so the government only actually get to meet here with the King's permission. It stood here, though, in one form or another for more than 900 years, although the vast majority of it is actually quite a bit newer than that. When it was first built in the 11th century, it served as a royal palace and was actually the main home of the monarch right through until the late medieval period. King Henry VIII was the last monarch to live here, but when a fire burned down his royal apartments in 1512, he moved across the road to the Palace of Whitehall, which was built in about the year 1240, and with more than 1,500 rooms and covering 23 acres, was the largest palace in Europe at the time. What was left of this building, though, continued to serve as the home of British Parliament because it had actually been meeting here since the 1200s anyway. The fire of 1512, though, was not the only fire to take place here, because on the 16th of October 1834, an overheated stove set fire to the House of Lords chamber, which then quickly spread to the rest of the building and burned it down again. That was the event I mentioned in our Buckingham Palace video that led King William IV to unsuccessfully offer up Buckingham Palace as a replacement, although King William IV didn't really like Buckingham Palace anyway. The fire that took place here that night, though, is actually considered to be the worst fire to take place in London between the Great Fire of 1666 and the Blitz of the Second World War, which, as it happens, also heavily damaged the building as well. It was repaired again by 1950, though, so let's go and see what it looks like today. At this end of the building, we see Big Ben, which is what everybody calls it, although Big Ben is of course the name of the bell inside the tower and not of the tower itself. Big Ben, installed behind the clock face up there, was installed in 1859 and weighs 13.5 tons, which makes it slightly heavier than a double-decker bus. The tower that it stands in was simply known as the Clock Tower ever since it was built. It was then renamed the Elizabeth Tower in 2012 to commemorate the Diamond Jubilee of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. At the other end of the building, with a flagpole on the top, we see the Victoria Tower, and the Victoria Tower was named the Victoria Tower in exactly the same way in 1897 to commemorate the Diamond Jubilee of Her Majesty Queen Victoria. The oldest part of the building, though, is this part here, Westminster Hall, which has stood here exactly like this since 1097, when King William II was on the throne. It's inside that building that William Wallace of Braveheart fame was sentenced to death in 1305, and King Charles I was sentenced to death in 1649 amidst the horrors of the English Civil War. His death sentence was brought about in no small part by the actions of rival Oliver Cromwell, who we talked about briefly in our Bridges video, and now stands here as a statue directly behind me. At this corner of the building, though, the southwestern corner, is another statue of 12th century King Richard I, who was also known as Richard the Lionheart, and the statue stands in what is known as Old Palace Yard. And Old Palace Yard, although perhaps not as notorious as anywhere like Tower Hill or Tyburn, is yet another spot here in London where a number of public executions took place. One of the best known was the execution of legendary explorer Sir Walter Raleigh, who was beheaded here on the 29th of October 1618, but Raleigh, weirdly enough, was actually no stranger to being handed the death penalty. He'd previously been sentenced to death back in 1603 for treason, but when King James I had intervened to spare him, he spent 13 years locked inside the Tower of London instead. In 1617, he was then pardoned to conduct an expedition to Venezuela, but only on the agreement that he did not engage in hostilities against the Spanish while he was out there. A number of his men had then attacked a Spanish outpost anyway, though, which led an outraged Spanish ambassador to demand that his death penalty be reinstated. King James I, under the circumstances, felt that he didn't really have any other option, and so this is where the execution took place. Scottish nobleman James Hamilton was also beheaded here on the 9th of March 1649, but the most infamous execution to have taken place here is actually that of 35-year-old Guy Fawkes, who had been sentenced in Westminster Hall to a rather gruesome death over his role in the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. The previous year, Fawkes had become involved with a group of English Catholics led by a man named Robert Catesby, who wished to assassinate King James I, who was a Protestant, and replace him with his daughter, Elizabeth Stuart, who now lies buried in Westminster Abbey. To do this, the plan was to blow up the building while the king was opening Parliament that July, and so, after managing to lease an unused storage room directly beneath the House of Lords, they loaded dozens of barrels of gunpowder into it, but then they hit a problem. A number of plague outbreaks had postponed the opening of Parliament to November the 5th, and by the time August arrived, it was discovered that the gunpowder in the barrels had started to decay. More gunpowder was brought in to replace it, but then they hit a second problem. A few of the conspirators had begun to get uncomfortable with the idea of potentially blowing up fellow Catholics in the blast, and so someone sent an anonymous letter to a man named William Parker, who was also known as Lord Monteagle, was a Catholic himself, and was due to be in attendance here for the opening of Parliament. Whoever wrote him the letter was warning him to stay away. At first, though, it seems that he thought it was a hoax, and so, even when the conspirators learned that he'd received it, they pressed on with the plan anyway, but as the fateful day arrived, Monteagle had become uncomfortable after all. The letter was shown to King James I, and in the early hours of the 5th of November, he demanded that the storeroom was searched. The gunpowder was discovered, Fawkes was arrested while attempting to flee the scene, and King James I ordered that he be tortured at the Tower of London to reveal the names of his co-conspirators. Along with 7 others, he was then found guilty after standing trial here at Westminster Hall on the 27th of January 1606, and then re-imprisoned at the Tower. On the 31st, along with 3 men named Thomas Winter, Ambrose Rookwood and Robert Keyes, he was then dragged back here by a horse to meet his execution, which, after being first hanged until he was almost dead, Attorney General Sir Edward Coke had declared, was to involve his genitals being cut off and burned before his eyes, before his bowels and heart were then removed. Unsurprisingly, Fawkes didn't fancy that very much, so at the moment when his hanging was due to begin, much to the irritation of some of the people gathered here, it seems that, with a rope around his neck, he climbed higher up the ladder than he was expected to, jumped, broke his neck, and died instantly. Gunpowder Treason Day, or Guy Fawkes Night as it's now known, has been a day of patriotic celebration every year on November 5th, since the end of the 1600s. It was also an anti-Catholic event originally, though, and an excuse to burn effigies of the Pope, but everybody seems to have forgotten about that now. So, if you're heading off to a fireworks display tonight, just remember that it wouldn't be taking place at all if it wasn't for the events that took place right here all those years ago. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, share this video with your friends, and you might like to watch this video next. I'll see you back here real soon for more walking history.